Few creatures of the night have captured our imagination like vampires. What explains our enduring fascination with vampires? And what dark and hidden parts of our psyche are aroused and captivated by the legends of the undead?
Over the course of the 1990s, the horror genre went through something of a reawakening. The goth subculture of the late 1980s had grown so large that by the mid-90s, it was starting to influence the mainstream. The human race reached its cultural peak in the late 1990s, and this is in no small part because vampires are so f***ing cool. And in computer games, there was something of a land grab happening as new creators were jostling to feed this public hunger for horror. 1999 was an incredible year for horror games. One game in particular, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver by California-based Crystal Dynamics, is my favorite game of all time. A technically and aesthetically outstanding game about vampires, Soul Reaver also has a soundtrack by the Information Society's Kurt Harland. The reason this is important is Crystal Dynamics are hitting the nail on their head here. Information Society had released Don't Be Afraid 2 years earlier, and that album is still considered a key landmark in the cybergoth movement. One track from that album, Ozar Midrashim, became Soul Reaver's title track. What I'm saying here is this is a moment of peak cultural convergence. This is perfect timing. Soul Reaver was the perfect game at the perfect time. This year is a special year for me. This is the 10th year of me making YouTube videos about old computer games, and so I thought, when better would there be an opportunity for me to unabashedly gush about my favourite game. So get your pentagram necklaces and your fingerless gloves, because we're going full on edgy goth boy, and we're going to be looking at Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. After publishing the supernatural platformer Pandemonium and the vampire RPG Blood Omen: The Legacy of Kain, Crystal Dynamics officially stepped down from publishing games to focus squarely on developing them. They acquired the rights to Pandemonium and developed the sequel in-house, adding unlockable powers, upgradable health, and boss battles. This is important. After Gex 2, Crystal Dynamics then developed Akuji the Heartless. Based on the Gex engine, Akuji is a supernatural horror game where the protagonist is betrayed and murdered in the opening act, and he then stalks the spirit realm collecting souls for an elder god. This is also important. This is CD learning to flex their storytelling muscles in a space where they're clearly very talented. By the time Soul Reaver went into production, Crystal Dynamics had a pretty solid idea of where their strengths lay. CD were going to take what they'd learned from this previous few games, and they were going to develop a new horror game based on the Gex 3 engine. And as they'd done with Pandemonium before, this time they had designs to create a sequel to Blood Omen. Leading up the design was Richard Lemarchand. He had been senior designer on Gex, Pandemonium 2, and Gex 2. Writing, design, and production was undertaken by Amy Hennig. She had been with Crystal Dynamics since 1996 and had helped manage Blood Omen and helped to get that game over the line. Hennig had been working on a design document internally for a game that she was calling Shifter, where the main character was a fallen angel who was betrayed by his brothers. Shifter would see this fallen angel shifting between different planes of reality as he tracked down and killed his former brothers. This is exactly the kind of edgy, broody content that Crystal Dynamics were looking for, so they asked Hennig to merge this shifter concept with the groundwork which had already been laid down in Blood Omen. And so the angels became vampires and Bob's your uncle. In the opening cutscene, we see our main character Raziel, his vampire brothers, and their leader Kain. Kain is the king of the vampires and is a total badass. He and his vampire army have hunted humankind to near extinction and now keep them alive purely as a food source. For reasons I don't really need to go into here, Raziel ends up betrayed and murdered by his brothers. But instead of dying, Raziel is brought back from the brink of oblivion by a Cthulhu-esque elder god who resides far below the world of Nosgoth. The elder god tells Raziel that vampires are a blight on Nosgoth, and so Raziel is given the opportunity and the conviction for revenge against his brothers and his former master. That's the opening cutscene, by the way, so there's no spoilers there, and you better believe that there is way more to it. The twists and the turns, mate, there are some unbelievable humdingers in here, and I want to say right away that the story is probably the number one reason I still love Soul Reaver so much. I do think it's really important to say at this point that the first time I played it, I'd never even heard of Blood Omen, let alone played Blood Omen. I just thought, wow, this is a lot of world building for one game. Soul Reaver is set 1500 years after the events of Blood Omen, and I can honestly say you do not need to have played it. The game gives you everything you need to understand the story, which is honestly a masterful way to write any sequel. One thing that is kind of cool and of note is that this is a heel turn for Kain. He was the protagonist in Blood Omen and now he's the villain. I think that's pretty rad. Raziel soon finds out that he has in fact been gone for several centuries. Nosgoth is now this post-apocalyptic wasteland. The vampires have near enough wiped humanity out and are now these weird mutated monsters reduced to infighting and cannibalism and retreating to their strongholds to defend themselves from one another. To his utter disgust, Raziel finds out that it's not just them who are changed. On the surface, Soul Reaver looks like your run-of-the-mill dark fantasy melee combat game, but out of the gate we're hit with the first major gameplay pillar which makes Soul Reaver unique, and that is plane shifting. In order to better do his job, the Elder God gave Raziel the ability to shift from the world of living to the world of the dead, and back again. And it's as spooky as it sounds, with Raziel shifting from these dead, empty cathedrals in the material realm to find them teeming with angry ghosts in the spectral realm. It's not just a narrative conceit either. Raziel's ability to shift between the physical and spectral realms forms part of the core gameplay loop. The differences between these two realms forms most of the puzzle-solving experience. Doors can be opened and switches can be thrown in the physical realm, but nothing moves in the spectral realm. Time doesn't pass. Water has no substance. You can pick up and lob a spear in the physical realm, switch to the spectral realm, and then you can actually see it stood still in the air. It's pretty sick, man. The spectral realm is also a distorted mirror of the physical, with parts of the game only accessible once you've shifted between realms and seen the level twist and contort as you move into the spirit realm. Twisting and mutating all this level geometry in real time might not seem that impressive now, but Crystal Dynamics were flexing some pretty impressive tech for the late 1990s. Another unique part of the Soul Reaver aesthetic is that Raziel's vampire bloodlust has now been replaced with a hunger for souls. In a practical gameplay sense, Raziel's health constantly drains whilst he's in the physical realm, and the only way to keep it topped up is to keep the player actively fighting and eating the souls of defeated vampires. Raziel's ability to straddle the worlds of the living and the dead mean there's no real penalty to dying anyway. Losing all of his health will just drop Raziel into the spectral realm, and as this is opposite land, his health actually goes up over time here, and then soon enough he can pop back into the physical world and continue onwards. The combat itself is pretty shallow in terms of the movements and the combos available, but the range of environmental finishers is pretty cool, and it gives the player just enough to enjoy these early stages of the game, and it keeps them engaged in that core combat loop. Within the first hour of me playing Soul Reaver for the first time, I was just like, yeah, this is great. Unique ideas, some fancy presentation. I was hooked. And from this point on, Raziel is then free to chip about Nosgoth's surprisingly large world map, visiting each of the kingdoms or the lairs of Kain's 6 vampire lords. As I've mentioned, the vampire clans in Soul Reaver have evolved over the centuries into these specialized bestial forms, each clan taking on unique characteristics. Historically, Nosgoth's vampires all suffered from the same traditional weaknesses that we associate with vampires, sunlight, water, fire, probably garlic. As each clan has evolved on their own though, they've gained new strengths and some have become immune to some of these weaknesses. The designs and the silhouettes of Soul Reaver's vampires are masterfully realised. Each one is recognisable at a glance, and the character animation and sound design is quality, mate. Each of the vampire clan's territories reflects their unique abilities. The Silenced Cathedral with its sheer walls and turrets is the perfect fortress for vampires which have evolved to climb. The Drowned Abbey is the perfect hideout for aquatic vampires. Thematically, this is all very interesting, but also it gives each of these levels a unique design identity and variety in traversal. Once Raziel has fought and puzzled and platformed his way through each of their lairs, each clan leader serves as the end of level boss, and each one of these vampire lords is a masterclass in monster design. A fully realised, condensed concept of what a merman vampire would look like, or a spider vampire. And once you see Melchiah, the game's first boss, who is this gross construct of zombies or dead bodies or something, you know that you're in for a treat for the rest of them. And they just keep on giving with both visual and contextual quality. Fighting the bosses rarely relies on combat alone. There is usually an element of puzzle solving involved, which I absolutely love. It makes each encounter feel unique, but it also reinforces the unique identity, the strengths and the weaknesses of that vampire clan. Further reiterating Soul Reaver's core soul reaving theme, once Raziel's defeated each one of his brothers, he then drinks up their soul, but in the process he keeps their unique evolved abilities for himself. Raziel will soon be immune to water, he'll be able to climb walls, he's able to fire psychic projectiles, moving from location to location, fighting vampires, gaining their abilities. That core loop is so beautifully realised. It resonates thematically so closely with that vampire theme, and it's all just so internally consistent. It's brilliant. And as I can't find anywhere better to put this in the script, I'll mention that around 20% of the way through the game, Raziel acquires a magic sword called the Soul Reaver. Well, that's not a spoiler either, that's on the box. Essentially, it's a spooky lightsaber that is permanently grafted onto Raziel's arm. Once Raziel has it, the Soul Reaver essentially renders all mundane weapons moot, and 2, it helps to maintain Raziel's life force in the physical realm. You can't take on your brothers in any order, as you will need a certain skill before you can enter each kingdom. You are funneled into a pretty linear progression through the game, but considering Soul Reaver relies so much on story and narrative, this makes sense. Once you've completed each area, you've absorbed the boss's soul, you've gained a new ability, you then move on to the next area. Pretty soon though, Raziel is phasing, gliding, climbing and swimming all across Nosgoth. And this is a good thing because there are some regions of the map which are entirely optional. Exploring and experimenting with Raziel's new skills is openly encouraged here. There are a bunch of glyph tombs which are all entirely optional, as well as a bunch of life and magic force power-ups. The glyphs add quite a lot to the depth of the combat. Each one is like a magic spell that Raziel can use to fight the game's vampires. Not all of them kill outright. In truth, all of them work better when you're surrounded by more than one enemy, but Soul Reaver isn't really a game where you find yourself swamped with enemies, so 2 or 3 is about as good as you'll get, but even so, they are really cool to watch, and it's a fun little thing to add into the game. Pretty sick, considering it's entirely optional and you don't need to do it. There is a whole area of the map called the Human Citadel, which is rendered entirely optional due to a bunch of content that was cut from the game. You can play the entire game without ever knowing it's there, in fact. It's a little sad because it was originally going to be connected up to the other areas of the game, and there was going to be a boss down in the bottom where you'd fight a human priestess and she'd give you the ability to possess humans and vampires. Nearly all of this content ended up being cut, so what was left is this kind of sad, empty citadel that's just filled with the remains of the human cattle just milling around. I really want to talk about how cool this area ended up because of this. There is so much world building done in my mind just by having this present. My imagination runs wild. It's super atmospheric to me, and it's not even a loss at all. I actually think it's better because of this. On that subject, the amount of stuff that was cut from this game is crazy for a game from this era. Eidos Interactive actually bought Crystal Dynamics partway through the development of Soul Reaver, and no doubt they came in and started making hard decisions in order to get this game shipped. There's a bunch of abilities, new weapons, new glyphs, enemy types, more vampire types, demons, vampire hunters. All of this was cut. One of Raziel's brothers doesn't even turn up. Technically, the game doesn't even have a real ending. But that's why I really like this game. That's why I come back to it, and that's why I've played it so many times. It is just deep enough to keep me engaged all the way through, but it doesn't have all this exhaustive content that would honestly just give me anxiety to find it all. I don't feel like I've got to pour dozens of hours into this to get anywhere. I can put 1 hour into this game and feel like I've made some progress. Honestly, it was the right decision to cut this out to get the game finished, but it's worth talking about it because I think Soul Reaver could well have been the most ambitious game of the 1990s. And that ambition could probably be showcased most effectively in the game's voice acting. There is so much voice work in this game, especially for the time. I do not remember playing a game before this which had had so much voice acting in it, and I've played precious few sins which still hold up to the quality of Soul Reaver. The writing is incredibly baroque. Seeing this script written down might actually make you cringe, and that alone is a testament to the quality of the actors here. These guys could read the phone book and make it sound like a compelling novel. Michael Bell stars as Raziel, and his delivery is spot on. Raziel's anger at his betrayal and then his own self-loathing of his new wraith form just drips out of Bell's acting. It is such a strange and nuanced role to be playing, but he plays it completely straight, fully embracing the character. Bell is one of the all-time great voice actors. He's been in the industry for over half a century, and he has a hell of a CV. There's almost zero chance that you haven't encountered Michael Bell somewhere before, and the texture and the quality of his voice, man, he absolutely shines in this game. Every hero needs a villain, and Simon Templeman flawlessly delivers Kain's menace and hubris. Templeman's career is another star-studded one with a huge amount of computer game work over the last 20 or 30 years in some of the biggest franchises out there. Templeman had previously played Kain in Blood Omen, so it made sense to bring him on. The additional lines and the additional role here in Soul Reaver elevates him to the next level. He is such a good villain, such a good foil for Raziel. It's just perfect to me. The shining light of the entire production is the late, great Tony J. The first time I heard the Elder God speak, I was like, hey, it's the chicken guy from Mighty Max. And of course, he is the chicken guy from Mighty Max. Tony J was an absolute hero. His incredible baritone voice made him a real presence, not just in animation, but in film and TV too. The man got a lot of work as a villain and more than one turn as a big, menacing, ethereal presence. And Tony just plays that beautifully. The rest of the modest voice cast is made up of Skylar White, Big Boss, and Norman Osborn. It's important to remember that it was still uncommon to have any voice acting in games of 1999. And for this time, the assembled voice cast here are just astounding. Crystal Dynamics were utilizing sophisticated storytelling methods. Soul Reaver is a technically and aesthetically excellent horror product at a time when the market really wanted it. Eidos spent $4 million marketing Soul Reaver, including magazine articles and television spots that fully reflected the alternative sensibilities of the 90s edgy teen. 1999 saw horror films like The Mummy and The Blair Witch Project absolutely wrecking the box office. Soul Reaver really was the right game at the right time. Soul Reaver was a success, both critically and commercially. Soul Reaver holds a 91% rating on Metacritic, making it one of the top 20 PS1 games of all time, and it sold at least 1.5 million units during its lifetime, which is certainly nothing to be sniffed at. The combination of exploration, combat, and puzzle solving with those horror themes cast a boilerplate for success. It's easy to argue that games which followed, like Castlevania, Devil May Cry, Darksiders, Bayonetta, these games all owe a small debt to Soul Reaver. By the end of the game, I had enough of the block puzzles. All of the puzzles in the game are block puzzles, and it's really surprising just how varied Crystal Dynamics could make them. But the platforming is definitely showing its age. I'm playing the PC version, which is a port of the PlayStation 1 version, and the controls are whack. This is at a time before PC games had really robust analog joypad support, so it's kind of forgivable for the time. Or you can download the Wrace mod, which I have linked in the description. This fixes most of the problems that you would have with the game. It gives you a much wider range of resolutions, and it allows the game to run in 60 FPS. It broke the Steam overlay, so I couldn't use my Steam controller config that I'd made for it, but it works pretty much perfectly in all other aspects. Now, at the time of writing this video, Soul Reaver has been pulled from Steam. There is allegedly a Night Dive remaster on the way, so by the time this video goes live, it'll probably be obsolete immediately. But who cares, man? This game's great and I'll talk about it anyway. If you are interested in playing it, then honestly, Crystal Dynamics made their money on this game, and Square Enix really doesn't need the £1 that you'd probably spend buying this on GOG. So if I were you, I would emulate the Dreamcast version. You can run it in 4K 60 FPS in emulators, and it will pretty much run on anything. It supports analog sticks out of the gate, and you can use hacks to get it running in widescreen, and there are texture packs for it. It is probably the most definitive version of the game. I did a 100% run through of this game for this video in around 14 hours, but I think if you just did the story, you could probably play the whole thing through in 2 sittings. This game is essentially a time machine back to when I was a teenager. It reminds me of being that age. But objectively, I think this is a captivating look back into 90s culture. And it is also a really great game. The quality of the storytelling tools, the voice acting, and oh my god, the music. It is the perfect 1999 experience. Thank you for watching my video about Soul Reaver, my favourite game of all time. I am so fulsome about this game. It hit me at such an important part of my life, and I'd love to share this game with people who haven't played it, or talk to people who have. So please drop something in the comments, subscribe if you like old computer games and old horror games. I've got a bunch of that stuff on the channel, and I'll see you in a future video. Alright, ta-da!